Hello everyone and welcome to yet another day in the clown decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And today truly is a clown decade week because once again it is nothing but bad news for the Labour ministers, and yet they are still somehow in power. I don't think I can ever remember a worse week even for the Tories. There was a string of scandals that did hit the Tories, but largely at least they could keep the MPs under control. This time round, though, well, you'll see as we get into the story. So 2 weeks ago, there are no concessions on benefits reform, Starmer tells the rebels. So there was already a stirring of a rebellion on the Labour backbenches, but Starmer let them know there will be no concessions and you will vote for this. Despite the possibility of a backbench revolt, the Prime Minister says he must change the system because it is not working for taxpayers. And that's true, by the way. The welfare bill for the United Kingdom has just ballooned ridiculously, and it is just completely breaking the economy down. It's basically put it to a halt. Tories tried to put a load of reforms in, but the reforms actually just ended up making things worse. It's one of those age-old things as well, where effectively, because Tories are known as a nasty party, they can't do anything with welfare or public spending without it massively affecting their vote share, and so they have to basically put Labour in a position where they can't do anything else, and, well, they're in a position they can't do anything else, and they still have a load of maniac MPs who say, no, we are not cutting the welfare bill, despite the fact it takes up a third of public spending. So the Prime Minister said he has got to get the reforms through as ministers prepare to publish legislation this week that is likely to prompt Starmer's biggest backbench rebellion yet. While ministers insist they are confident of avoiding defeat, there is nervousness in government about 170 Labour MPs raising concerns about reforms, which will make it harder to claim personal independence payments, the main disability benefits, which absolutely should be harder to get. You know, having mild autism gets you on PIP. The type of people that could definitely get jobs, but just don't, because mild autism counts as a disability, therefore you get PIP. The whole point of PIP as well is that it's supposed to be payment for people effectively who are disabled to the point that they need help or a carer to live. I know people that live alone that are on PIP. Part of the questionnaire is effectively, can you cook for yourself? Can you wash yourself? Can you put clothes on yourself? Most of these people can. You know, there are people with psoriasis who have this, psoriasis just being effectively a skin rash, which, okay, can develop into joint pain, but at the end of the day, if you can wash, bathe and clothe yourself, maybe PIP isn't for you. And then obviously if you can't, well, that's obviously the type of person that should be on PIP. That was the whole point of it. Again, PIP was a Tory reform that was supposed to do this, and effectively the opposite happened, and it just made it easier for everyone to get on benefits yet again. Starmer, however, insisted that even critics agree that we've got to reform the welfare system, saying the principles remain the same. Those who can work should. Those who need support into work should have the support into work, which I don't think they are getting at the moment. Those who are never going to be able to work should be properly supported and protected, and that apparently includes not being reassessed and reassessed. Well, you obviously should be reassessed because circumstances change. Anyway, yes, I would be quite happy to wean people off PIP and effectively help them find a job if that's really what they need PIP for. Oh, I need PIP so that I can be supported into work. I don't understand how just getting more money helps with that, but okay. It certainly helps them only being able to work part-time, I suppose, in that they effectively are subsidised to do that. But at the end of the day, especially with how easy it is to get work-from-home jobs, yeah, I'm not that sympathetic. Anyway, last week the ministers were offering rebels a £500 million olive branch, promising that those who lost PIP would have 13 weeks before their payments stopped, and that the same 3-month transition period would also apply to 150,000 people who stand to lose a carer's allowance linked to a cancelled PIP claim. Yeah, that's the other quite funny thing. You can get a carer's allowance for someone who's on PIP, but you can only claim that if you're earning under a certain amount of money, which obviously is just encouraging people not to work. Ministers say that this longer than any other transition payment and will mean that no one loses out before 2027. They say there can be no change in the main thrusts of the reform, which will make it harder to qualify for help with everyday tasks such as washing and dressing. They're alarmed at the soaring cost of sickness benefit, which have risen by £20 billion since the pandemic, and which will rise by another £18 billion by the end of Parliament. This despite reforms that will save £5 billion. Yeah, because Tories made it too easy to get on PIP. And I'm kind of fed up of having to bring up the Tories and effectively saying, oh, it's just incompetence. I don't think that quite covers just how bad things got. Anyway, these leading rebels have dismissed last week's attempts at reassurance, saying that they want a fuller impact assessment and an immediate review of PIP criteria. A wider review promised by ministers is not expected to be completed until after tougher rules have come into effect in November 2026. Just put it off, put it off, put it off, put it off. Review, 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 review. Inquiry, inquiry, inquiry. Nothing changes. Just a terrible way to do government. Neil Duncan-Jordan, a leading backbencher critic of the bill, agreed with ministers last week that the extra transition period were not a concession and confirmed he would vote against it. He said MPs should recognise the cuts will make disabled people poorer. No amount of warm words mask the reality. Cuts don't create jobs, they create austerity. Oh, this is the calibre of MP we have, for goodness sake. Oh, you can't do that, it's austerity, the Tories did that. Yeah, not really. They raised taxes. The spending cuts that they did do, it just siphoned everything to the NHS because you didn't shut up about it. Now we've ended up in a position where we effectively have full-blown socialism and nobody really wants to admit it. Because once again, admitting it means that left-wingers have to admit that it doesn't work. But no, you've ended up just with a load of under-30s who are just a bunch of communists. Brian Leishman, another backbench left-winger, attacked the reforms as a complete insult to disabled people and against everything a Labour government should ever do to people that need help. Anyway, the ministers believe that less hardline critics will be persuaded to fall in line by evidence that the government is listening to concerns, as suggested by Kemi Badenoch, the Tory leader, in case you forgot. That her party would vote against the bill is also seen as helpful by party managers who say Labour MPs will not want to walk through lobbies alongside Conservative MPs. That is a ridiculous thing to hope for, because the easy cope there, and it's not even untrue, is that, well, Tory MPs are just going to go against anything that Labour do because they're in opposition. I would not be relying on that to win this vote. But anyway, obviously, we move to an article a few days later where a government whip resigns over proposed disability welfare cuts. Vicky Foxcroft said she could not vote for reforms which include cuts to disabled people's finances. This is the problem we're in. Tories can't do it because they think it vindicates accusations from Labour that they're the nasty party. Labour can't do it because they had true believers of that. And this is why you've ended up in this death spiral of any reform you do actually ends up just being worse than the way the system was working before, because ultimately you're trying to cut, in some ways, the disability benefits. You end up with PIP, then you end up making it easier to get PIP, you end up with a quarter of Britain disabled, and then a sixth of your GDP is straight on the benefits bill. It's absolutely crazy. I include pensions in that, of course, that's the main driver of all this, but my god, trying to touch the state pension, god, that's like playing with fire. You just can't do that, and as I keep saying, this is the problem we're in with the government. They just can't touch any of these massive issues. They can only skirt around the edges. And this is why a completely new player in Parliament running the damn thing would probably help. Honestly, Greens would probably fix the problem just by total incompetence. So Foxcroft is the first Labour MP to resign over the issue. Others have been threatened with the prospect of never getting a ministerial job under Starmer if they choose to defy the government on the reforms. I don't think they're particularly worried about that. I think they're taking a look at the polls and thinking, well, I don't think that's much of a risk. More than 80 MPs have told party whips they cannot support Starmer's proposal to cut the $5 billion from the welfare bill, which was published on Wednesday, and has called on Downing Street to rethink the plans. They can't even cut $5 billion off a bill that is over $300 billion. Cannot even cut, what's that, about 1.5%? 1.6%, something like that. Close to 1.7%, doesn't really matter. It's peanuts, effectively. Can't even do that. In a letter to Starmer, Foxcroft, who has been an MP since 2015, said, "I do not believe that the cuts to personal independent payments and the health element of the universal credit should be part of the solution. We'll come up with an alternative. I've wrestled with whether I should resign or remain in government and fight for the change from within. Sadly, now it seems that we are not going to get the changes I desperately wanted to see. Therefore, I tender my resignation, as I know I will not be able to do the job that is required of me, and whip, or indeed vote, for reforms which include cuts to disabled people's finances." As I keep saying, and have said for some time, it's simply impossible to actually make any sort of major cut, major reform with the Uniparty, because effectively they are both paralysed by the ridiculous left-wingers in the Labour Party, whereas the right-wingers, who in Tories I mean, who are frankly much closer to your average person in terms of temperament and politics. They're effectively constantly bullied out of all power, thanks to obviously the crazy leftist media class, Whitehall system, and then of course the dinner parties in London that everyone talks about. But these are the type of people who will be looking at disabled people in the complete abstract and effectively be thinking of C.S. Lewis paintings when they think of disabled people, when in reality, as I say, people with eczema can claim PIP benefits because, well, effectively they can lie and say, oh, that's then affecting my mental health, that's them making me suicidal, that's then causing me to have too much depression and anxiety to get up and dress myself and things like this. And then you think back to a C.S. Lewis painting and you see these people without legs on little wooden carts going to and from houses and factories and things like that, and you think, well, maybe it is time we have a bit more of that spirit again. Life is hard and it can be harder for other people, and any help you can get obviously is good, but when it's coming at the expense of making the country any sort of viable place to live for everyone else, who effectively subsidises you, then yeah, obviously there needs to be a change. Anyway, the day after this resignation, a dozen ministers could quit over Starmer's disability welfare cuts. Government figures say they will oppose reforms to PIP and universal credit, while some believe the vote will have to be pulled. Well, we'll get into that too. So, as many as a dozen members of government are prepared to resign rather than support Starmer's controversial welfare reforms, it has been claimed, as backbench critics accuse ministers of betraying Labour values. The Labour values of infinite money for people who claim they're disabled. Again, there's no way a quarter of the people in the UK are disabled. What that would mean is that this Tory government caused more people to be disabled than World War I caused. That includes shell-shocked people, by the way, so that includes mental disability. The Tories have literally been worse than World War I. Like, they were bad, I don't think they were that bad. A senior government figure told The Times that about 12 of their colleagues had privately indicated they would find it impossible to support the measures that are due to be voted on a week on Wednesday, sorry. Another leading opponent said that as many as 80 Labour MPs were holding firm in opposition to the plans and believed the government would ultimately have to pull the vote. Because ultimately, if the Labour government does fail at this vote, that is highly embarrassing, and again, we're not even a year into this parliament. And it's effectively acting like very late stage 14-year Tories. If this goes through, this will be our version of tuition fees, they said. The optics of taking away money from people who find it difficult to go to the toilet are terrible. Again, I'm not being funny, but I would wager that more than half the people who are on PIP do not have any difficulty going to the toilet. The government has worked a majority of 165, meaning that 83 Labour MPs would have to rebel for Starmer to lose the vote. Whips are warning potential rebels that they will be blacklisted from any future government job as long as Starmer is Prime Minister. Again, I don't think they're too worried about that. Even if they simply abstain, anyone openly opposing the plan faces the threat of having the whip suspended entirely, and growing concern in number 10 that the vote could slip away from the government. Imagine if they just got rid of 80 MPs. That would have ruined their majority completely. That would actually be quite funny, but I don't think it'd happen. There's no way they'd suspend 80 whips. Just not happening. But one government source suggested that contingency plans to pull the vote altogether were being prepared in case Starmer's team concluded that they did not have the numbers, which would also be highly embarrassing. Can't even control your MPs, so you have to pull one of your apparently major reforms to the welfare bill by cutting it by 1 to 2%, which is nowhere near what needs to happen, by the way. A year in and you're having to pull quite major and high-profile plans through Parliament. Not good. On top of that, this is quite clearly one of the Dominic Cummings things as well. There's no way that this was in the Starmer manifesto. This is a priority from Whitehall that, once again, Starmer, because he has absolutely no plan whatsoever, is having to go along with, and none of his ministers like it. Just like the winter fuel payment had to U-turn, 2-child benefit cap, probably going to U-turn on that too. He has no plan, and is just following the will of Whitehall versus the will of whatever the media class say he has to do. What's effectively happened is Britain has voted in a total NPC into Parliament, and for some reason people have realised this and are still adverse to people that are not NPCs. I suppose because that's a risky venture. And we're just a society that has decided low risk is all that matters. Well, we've gone through that for years and we're in a terrible spot. Any move to back down would have implications for the government's finances, as the $5 billion of savings from the changes have already been banked by Rachel Reeves in the government spending plan. Oh, incredible. Even more even more borrowing. Honestly, the amount of people that say, oh, reform are a joke, how are they going to, this whole Britannia card thing, how's that going to save money? Don't you know it will cost 30-odd billion? That's been bounded around in his political canon, despite the fact it is the most made-up numbers I've ever seen from the OBR, to the point the OBR basically said, yeah, we made up those numbers. Not even joking. Those prepared to walk away from jobs are understood to be a mixture of junior ministers and parliamentary private secretaries, the MPs who act as the eyes and ears of the cabinet ministers in Westminster. A few are said to be new MPs only elected last year. Well, no wonder they're getting big for their boots. But fast forward a few days later, and Rachel Reeves warns welfare rebels they could devastate the government. So we're now at a point where effectively, listen, they are having to tell, Rachel Reeves herself is having to tell the MPs that if you rebel against this, it could bring down the government. Which, I'm not being funny, sounds like a good time to some of the MPs that see this government as Tory light anyway. Labour opponents of plans to curb spending on benefits have been told that by the Chancellor they risk fatally damaging the Prime Minister's authority. I don't think they care. I'm not being funny, I really don't think they care. But effectively, what I hear from an awful lot of people is that they voted Starmer in effectively to give themselves woke credentials, and he has managed to do the opposite of allowing them to have them. That's your classic elite liberal left view on the whole thing. So Reeves has warned Labour MPs they will devastate the government if they vote against the plan to cut Britain's 80 billion sickness benefits bill amid a last-ditch effort to salvage the reforms. In an attempt to see off a rebellion by more than 100 Labour backbenchers, the Chancellor told MPs in a series of calls that defeats would damage Sir Keir Starmer's authority to such an extent that it had effectively become a confidence vote in the government. That is possibly the last thing I would be saying in this situation publicly, but there we go, we are ruled by morons. Privately, some close to the Prime Minister are prepared to delay the next Tuesday's vote in an attempt to buy time and find concessions to win enough of the rebels around. One minister described the mood in government as one of panic. Yeah, it's nuts, isn't it? You cannot publicly say this is actually a confidence vote in the government and then the very next paragraph have it reported that you think you're going to lose that confidence. Again, this is late-stage Tory panic. And it's been done to Labour within the first year. Honestly, pathetic way to govern. The renewed lobbying effort came after 108 Labour MPs, so the number goes up, including 10 select committee chairs, signed an amendment on Monday that would effectively kill off the government's plan. There were claims the number of signatories to the amendments had increased to about 130, and up to a dozen junior ministers were said to prepare to resign to vote in favour of the plan. We need to see movement, said one rebel. Yeah, that's just destruction of the Labour Party as it exists. Sorry, I got confused with the Tory Party. Can't think why I'd do that. Anyway, Starmer has been largely avoiding Parliament and has not given an update on the G7 summit or any of the other international meetings he has had. And, well, in this case, he was at another one. While at The Hague for a NATO summit, Starmer insisted he would push ahead with the reforms. We're elected to change what is broken in our country. The welfare system is broken, and that's why we'll press ahead with it. I'd be fine with that if it was actually substantial, but tinkering around the edges with Pip, probably not the best way to do it. I'm not against it, I'm fine with it. I think it's something that should be looked at, but I think I do prefer the old reform route of basically completely reform the whole thing and you only get benefits if you're actually in work. And if you get 2 job offers and reject them both, you lose it, or if you've been out of work for 6 months, you lose it. If that's not an incentive to work, I don't know what is. And obviously for people that have absolutely no chance whatsoever of working, yeah, fair enough, but that's got to be a high bar. Starmer was also asked if he'd treat it as a confidence vote, which could trigger an election if it was lost, and he replied, "It's not a confidence vote, it's a vote about reforming our welfare system." So yeah, why would Reeves say that if Starmer clearly did not want that public? Incredible. Anyway, while the welfare bill is up in the air and we're not sure if it's being pulled or not at the moment, you end up with other parts of the economy just being absolutely decimated and public sector making it ever so worse. NHS doctors excited about more strikes, says BMA leader. About 50,000 junior doctors are being balloted for 6 months of industrial action in a dispute over pay. They got a pay rise, by the way. It was something stupid like 5%, but they demand more. Can't afford it. What do you mean? These are the type of people that would demand a pay rise, but would also want PIP payments to go up. These people literally think that money comes from nowhere. Oh, I'm providing a service, therefore I just deserve money. Sorry, those of us in the private sector don't get that. We have to actually do something useful. Well, junior doctors are doing something useful. Well, I mean, you say that, but the quality of them keeps going down every year. Doctors are excited at the prospect of going back out on strike. Leaders of the British Medical Association have said, of course they are. They don't have to work and they get paid for it. Dr. Ross Newt, oh God, I probably butchered that. The co-chair of the Resident Doctors Committee said the vast majority are excited to go out again as the union prepared to call for another wave of prolonged NHS walkouts. 50,000 junior doctors who now want to know as be known as resident doctors, just pathetic, are being balloted for 6 months of strike action and dispute over pay. Hospitals consulted have also launched an indicative ballot to see if members are prepared to take strike action, warning that they could join resident doctors on the picket line. At the BMA's conference in Liverpool, the union's leader warned that further strike action could wreck Labour's key election pledge of bringing down waiting lists and undermine the 10-year plan, due to be revealed by Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, next week. So, again, they are actively working against the Labour Party because they think they're blue Tories. That's what this comes down to. Just want an infinite amount of money, effectively, for effectively being trainees. Again, nobody else expects this ridiculous type of pay package. Okay, yeah, they went to uni for 7 years. At the end of the day, it's still just a job like any other, and it relies on supply and demand. This, by the way, is why the BMA restrict the number of places at university for medicine. We could probably have like double the amount of people doing medicine at university in Britain, but they make sure that they can't so that they can have an excuse to launch strike action like this to effectively up their wages. It's so cynical. Just to make it clear how ridiculous this is, resident doctors are getting an average of 5.4% increase this year, significantly more than nurses and the rest of the public sector. This on top of a 22% increase given to doctors last year after Labour took office. They are demanding a 29% pay increase this year, which they say is necessary to restore real-term pays to 2008 levels. Yeah, well, we don't have 2008 growth, do we? We've had fake growth for nearly 20 years at this point. Basically never recovered from the crash, by the way, and therefore, yeah, your real term pay is actually going to reflect where it should be at. Everyone's pay sucks. That's why everyone's fed up of Britain, because everything's getting more expensive and barely anyone's pay is going up. Why? Because productivity has been in the toilet for 20 years, and on top of that, we have had to pay for a welfare bill, well, not just welfare, a public sector that is growing and growing and growing and growing, and the tax bill's bigger than ever too. And yet I'm constantly told that we don't have enough taxes because one tax in Norway is way bigger than it is here, despite the fact that Norway has a load of lower taxes than compared to here. But anyway, Streeting has insisted no more money is available and not entering negotiations while strike ballots are continuing. Good. Like, I get it, everyone wants higher wages, and everyone probably deserves higher wages, but frankly, the fact of the matter is that because of all this public sector disaster that we've seen for not even 20 years. This has been a century long disaster. It ends up with people not understanding how the whole thing works, just thinking, well, if I was elsewhere, I'd be earning more money. And the normal people all move to places where they'd earn more money, like Australia, and the less ambitious type of people just stay here and demand more, despite the fact it's not affordable, and then vote for the opposite of a country that would actually be able to pay them more. It's going to be a never-ending cycle at this rate. Anyway, if it's not public sector workers demanding an even higher pay rise than anyone in the private sector has seen, then it's the public sector telling the government that they can't actually go through with their plans, say, on ending hotels for asylum seekers, as it's unrealistic, says the border chief. David Bolt, the independent chief inspector of borders and immigration, told the House of Lords Committee legal appeals would delay the removal of asylum seekers. Oh, it's the legal process, ECHR, a reform. Reform are going to do something about that. Are Labour going to do anything about that? Of course not, because at the end of the day, these international treaties, these international laws, the Human Rights Act and all that, that is all that matters. Great. So David Bolt, the independent chief inspector of borders and immigration, told peers he had written to ministers warning that he wasn't convinced smashing the gangs was the right way of thinking about things. Well, I could have told them that, in tackling channel crossings. Bolt also said that there was not enough housing stock to deal with the number of people in the asylum system. And there was even news that now this is affecting people in £500,000 homes because their neighbouring houses that also cost £500,000 has turned into homes of multiple occupants to house asylum seekers. And now that the rich people are getting directly affected by it, it's becoming a bigger issue. Same with the whole Altrincham thing. His comments came a fortnight after Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, announced the government's new pledge to stop using hotels to accommodate asylum seekers by the end of the current Parliament, expected in 2029, as part of a spending review earlier this month. However, when asked by the House of Lords Justice and Home Affairs Committee about the challenges in achieving the goal, Bolt said, "I don't think it will be achieved, frankly." In his recent inspection, which examined the quality of the decision-making process with regard to asylum claims, Bolt said there had been a significant increase in the number of refusals, prompting an increase in the number of appeals within the last year. Well, that's interesting to see, because everyone's assumption was that there would be no refusals, and instead they just let people through to stop the backlog. Apparently it's gone the other way, and now the backlog's just been pushed somewhere else, which is into the appeals process, which will just be another problem. I don't really understand why we allow for appeals of asylum seekers, to be quite honest. I guess it's an ECHR thing. Because, yes, indeed, mistakes can happen, but frankly, I only care to have those mistakes checked if they're British citizens. Bolt went on to say, "And so the numbers within the asylum system are not very tractable. They are very large numbers, and it's very hard to see how they're going to be reduced significantly, even over the length of a parliament." He said that despite the Home Office getting more local authorities engaged in providing housing for these claiming asylum, great, there was still a lack of housing supply to deliver the required number of places. This, by the way, is also putting house prices up. "I think there's a more fundamental issue about accommodation, or at least housing stock. There simply isn't sufficient housing stock to be able to deal with the sorts of numbers in the system, therefore you've got to use hotels." I wonder if he does address that the government are probably just going to buy these hotels outright rather than leasing them. Leasing them from the owners, that was right. Bolt, who previously served in the role between 2015 and 2021, returned as interim chief inspector last June, and said the focus on smashing the gangs was not the right way to approach the crisis. He said, "It did seem to me the challenge was to change the risk-reward ratio for those people involved in organised immigration crime. That's really a difficult thing to achieve because it's relatively low cost, relatively low risk for the perpetrators, and highly profitable. I'm not sure I feel optimistic about the ability to smash the gangs, and in any event, it seems to me, with organised crime, the best thing you can do is deflect it to something else you're less concerned about rather than to expect to eradicate it." That's fair, or do the Dominic Cummings thing of effectively kill or capture these people. Can you do that on enemy soil? It depends if you get caught. Sorry, Freudian slip. I'm mainly talking about France there, and I said enemy soil. I meant foreign soil, but I guess my blood really does run deep with the French hatred. So as a result of all this just terrible governance, it's kind of no surprise that we end up with, well, reports like this. Trust in Britain's system of government has collapsed to record lows, and voters remain broadly disappointed by Labour's performance, a long-running survey has found. I am not shocked. Only 19% of people say the way Britain is run could be improved. Much and a mere 12% trust the government to put the national interest first, demonstrating that the ousting of the Conservatives has failed to repair faith in the country's battered institutions. Well, I could have told you that. Stagnant living standards, dissatisfaction with the NHS, and the after effects of Brexit are all undermining confidence in the British system, according to the British Social Attitude Survey. Number 10 is increasingly concerned about the loss of trust in government, seeing it as a key reason behind the rise of Nigel Farage's Reform UK. As dissatisfied voters look beyond the main parties, Downing Street is seeking to focus on proving to swing voters, whom it has dubbed striving moderates and grafting realists, that conventional politics can offer lasting improvements to their lives. The scale of the challenge was underlined by findings from a decade-long survey showing that any optimism after Labour landslide victory quickly dissipated as Starmer put up taxes and cut services. Incredible. But he had to do it, because it's the only realistic way for things to go, and even Whitehall understand that, hence he did it. So the analysis of the survey says that the researchers found that with the low levels of trust, they were more likely to vote Reform or Green, saying for many the choice between the two parts of government looks too much like a choice between Tweedledum and Tweedledee. And it's quite worrying that an awful lot are voting Green, but I am worried about the future, to be honest with you. Many people between the ages of 18 and 30 are going very left-wing, and it's basically a Green Labour future, which is absolutely crazy and shows just how, despite the fact that everyone has to be in education until basically they're 21 now, shows how little work that's actually doing for any sort of understanding of how the world works in terms of economics, geopolitics, or anything like that, because the Greens are the worst party for all of that. But all they do is basically offer people free stuff, and that's why they vote for them. Effectively, we've brought up children to remain as children, while at the same time trying to push adult responsibility. Well, not responsibility, privileges like voting onto them. It's crazy. While Starmer boasts of putting country first, party second, voters largely don't believe him. 12% trust the government to put the national interest first, 46% says that this almost never happens. During the new Labour honeymoon, 33% trusted the government to do the right thing most of the time, 12% almost never. Well, that 12% was correct, and that's where I was. During the pandemic, the figure was more evenly split 24 to 27, before a collapse afterwards that continued under Labour. The 2024 election highlighted significant challenges to Britain's traditional two-party system, and as a result, the result has yet to restore public trust and confidence, said Alex Scholes of Natson. With voter trust at an all-time low and growing support for electoral reform, the political landscape is poised for potential transformation. Oh, almost definitely. The 2030s are going to be incredibly interesting, to say the least. Anyway, news just came out that Angela Rayner did announce that the welfare cut bill is being put through next Tuesday, so one of two things are happening. Either concessions have been made and the cut's not $5 billion anymore, it's probably going to be closer to, I don't know, 1, and so absolutely everybody's disappointed, or there's going to be a massive Labour rebellion and content is going to be absolutely stupendous next week. It's one of two, and either way, everyone in Britain loses. But there we go. Right, with that, that's everything I had for you for today. So tomorrow, Subnautica, Saturday, it is Laughing at the Guardian. Videos out as and when I can make them. Do subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment. If you can afford it as well, do become a channel member or do leave a super chat or super thanks. Those are great ways to help the channel. Right, with that, that's everything I had for you for today. So once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.